Today we'll be talking about what I found was the most difficult part of English, and that is the comparative essay. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Darren, a first year medical student studying at Monash University here in Melbourne, Australia. For those of you who are new to the channel, my credentials are that I scored a 99.95 last year and also a 50 in English. And for those of you who have kept up for the videos, today is going to be a comparative section version of the essay breakdowns that I've done on argument analysis and text response. So if you haven't watched those yet, check them out, but your comparative stacks are probably coming up soon, which is why I prepared this video. Two things before we begin. Firstly, thank you to those of you who commented I will ace the UCAT in the last video. I will probably do a wheel spinning or a random name generator in a YouTube live soon, so stay tuned for that. And with today's essay, I've picked an intro and a conclusion, which are from the same essay, whereas the body paragraph is from a separate essay. And I'll talk about what those essays are about so you have some context. By the way, my texts were Ransom, which was a book, and The Queen, which was a film. So let's dive straight into it. Okay, let's have a look at my intro. So my intro and conclusion were taken from a handwritten essay that I wrote under timed exam conditions. So it may be a little shorter than what you're preparing, but the concepts and structures remain the same. So as with any intro for both text response and for comparative, what I like to do was begin with a scene description. Now this isn't a random scene that I've pre-prepared. It comes from a knowledge of your film, of your book, of your play, and it's a scene that has to be key to the idea of the topic, because if you put a general one there, then they'll just feel like you've pre-memorized and you haven't answered the topic properly. And so the intro and conclusion that I'm showing you guys came from a topic about conflict and about how mismanaging conflict and how to correctly manage conflict. So here I have this image of Achilles brooding as Patroclus stands at the entrance of his hut. This is a really key part of the novel if you've read it. These two really close friends who fought together, bled together, grown up together, are now refusing to communicate properly with one another. And Achilles is letting his pride get in the way of good communication. And this scene also comes right before Patroclus goes out and wears the armor of Achilles and ends up being killed. And so this shows how if you don't resolve things properly, then your past affections and your relationships can crumble. Now I like starting off with a scene because it's sort of like a movie. It's really interesting, really exciting. The examiner can immediately see this image in their mind of what's happening, and I think it's just more cool than starting off with something more bland. Now after this, I go straight into my introduction of my body paragraphs. I don't like spending a ton of time in the intro. I think the bulk of your essay and your marks would come in the body paragraphs. Intro, I just really highlight what I'm talking about without complicating things too much. So first body paragraph, you can immediately tell, is about how a lack of communication can easily generate rifts between people who were once close. And this is obviously Patroclus and Achilles, and I have a different example for the Queen that I compare with. And then you can see in my second body paragraph, I'll be talking about how fellow feeling is a good way of resolving conflict, so sort of empathizing with one another. And here's also where I introduce the novel and the film. So introduce novel and the film. And so you don't have to do this at the start. You can introduce it whenever you want. I liked underlining my text and also having the full name of the director and the authors. And let me just write. So you can see my first one here. So 1, and then my second body paragraph is here. 2, and then my third body paragraph here. 3. And so even further, both director and author advocate for the ability to compromise in turbulent times, even if it is a difficult task. So my last body paragraph will be about how it's really important. So it's the importance of coming to a compromise, even when times are really difficult, even when you may be the other person may be your nemesis. And so the main takeaways here are 1, this scene description, and 2, really clear-cut signposting of what's to come in your essay. Okay, next let's dive into the body paragraph. So the body paragraph is on a different topic. It's about how acknowledging we are wrong is important, particularly for leaders. So here I start off with a topic sentence. Topic sentence, notice I don't talk about the no mention of text. I treat comparative more so as philosophy, and I find that's really the case here. You're not really comparing specifics of each text, you're comparing what each author is trying to comment about society, about human nature. And so this sentence, you can see it's not like something English, not like really directly English. It's a comment about life, it's a comment about leadership. And my next sentence, I sort of have this in English language as well. It's sort of like a hammer and a nail sentence. So my first sentence, I like thinking of it as a nail, you sort of put it in there, and the second sentence can be a hammer, which furthers your point and makes it stronger. This isn't always necessary, but I chose to do it here, so I'll explain it a bit more. However, this is no easy task, humility, blah, 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 blah. And next, I have a brief comparison of my 2 texts and the 2 moments that I'll be talking about. So overall, you might be wondering what structure I have for my comparative. I have this structure where I have sort of, the topic sentence, and then I have text 1, and then in the next part I compare text 1 and text 2, and then I have the concluding sentences. So I know some people will like to compare throughout, but this is the structure I went with, because I feel like it's harder to compare throughout without setting the scene first. So I think just solely talking about text 1 gave me the opportunity to set the scene a little bit. Anyway, let's get straight into it. So even though my first half of the essay, first half of the body paragraph is focused on ransom, I do have this overview comparison. So the danger with structuring it like me is that you might not compare it enough. So this helps a little bit here. So point of comparison. And sort of an overview of the moments I'll be talking about as well. So here, this is a similarity. Elizabeth's message to the people, Achilles' relinquishing of Hector's body, are transformative acts, and it's them admitting they are wrong, and it's how they move forwards. And then next, I dive into ransom. So from here all the way until about here is all about ransom. Notice how it's about half of the paragraph, slightly less than half of the paragraph. And yeah, so I just talk about ransom. In terms of my analysis for the exact, for this specific text, it's not like text response where you really dive into the language and the metaphors and what's really happening. It's more so what the author is trying to say through this moment. So it's sort of Achilles being stubbornly enfolded. I don't analyze, the idea of this idea of a spell being on him, and I don't really analyze the vivid language of barbaric spectacle, but I describe it. I use it more as a description to make my point that Achilles is really stubborn and is refusing to navigate out of his destructive behavior. And instead, Priam is the one who provides him with an alternative, and how returning Hector's body is this acknowledgement that his previous action was wrong. So once again, not really analyzing the language here, but rather what's happening and what these actions mean and what these actions represent. And of course, author's contention is really, really big in comparative. So this idea of what Maloof is trying to say, Maloof is actually celebrating this return, and because through this he's able to achieve freshness and stunned grief. I don't analyze the language, I analyze this change from violence to sort of almost catharsis. And this is the author's contention. Alright. Next, actually it ends about a sentence earlier. Next, I compare the novel and the film. So an important point with comparison is that you don't always want to make it too simple. So say like just like blah blah blah, they do this. You want to elaborate a bit more. Here I've written like Achilles, but you don't want to do it too much. So you might want to say just as Achilles initially refused to relinquish his anger, the Queen also stubbornly pursued the course of action. So that could be better as well, improvement I could have done here. But anyway, a point of comparison, once again, it's good to dive straight into your comparing of the two texts. And then all throughout, notice that unlike the first half of the text, here it's basically all a lot of comparison. So comparison. Rather than the first half of the text, which is more so, how do I have space here? Whoops. Which is more so description of just one text. So almost every sentence has some comparison in it. So like Achilles, the Queen, there's a similarity, though her continual insistence might not be as violent as the indiscretions of the animal Achilles. So it's really good to have similarities and differences in there, and it can be subtle similarities and differences as well. So here, a big similarity is that the Achilles and the Queen both initially refuse to do the proper way of acknowledging that they're wrong. But I'm just saying that here, Achilles' way of doing things, of absolutely destroying Hector and dragging his body around, is worse than the Queen's. Then the Queen's escape to Balmoral because it's more passive. But the public still perceive her as disgusting. So it's good to have more nuanced differences and similarities. And here, once again, I'm describing this change. A change from her refusing to escape. So here, let me do this. So her escape to Balmoral compared to her eventually relenting. So describing a change. So this just really helps me make my point that that what you're doing in the past of not letting go of not recognizing your wrongs is bad, and it changes into when you actually relent, then it's good. I need to show this before and after image. And here another point of comparison. That the Queen's change seems somewhat less personally transformative than that of Achilles. If you watch the film and read the novel, you know that Achilles changes a lot. He absolutely destroys Hector's body. He's an angry warrior, and then he's almost peaceful when he's sitting with Priam. Whereas with the Queen, her change is less significant because it's not in war, and it's less significant than Achilles is. For her, it's more so what she must do to survive. And another point of similarity, Elizabeth's speech, just like Achilles returning Hector's body. So the main point here is that you want to compare as much as you can when you're doing a similar structure to mine to avoid this becoming sort of like two text response essays stuck together. Fact that the Queen, and here, Maloof. And I like having this last sentence here, which is a pretty like a comment on human nature once again. So it zooms out of all the specific text comparison we're doing and talks more about human nature and what the authors are trying to say. So here, leaders are willing to admit their wrongs. They enable progress for themselves. So this is the contention of my entire paragraph, and once again, it's sort of like a comment on human nature, and it would sound right in an essay just about people and leaders rather than just an English essay, which is how it's supposed to be for comparative. Alright, cool. Let's move on to the conclusion then. So remember, with the conclusion, we're back to the topic about conflict. So with conflict, with conclusions, I also like ending off with an image, because I feel like with any film, with any novel, especially the last descriptions and images they leave you with are really powerful and are often the contention of the author as well, because this is what they want to linger in your heart after you've finished reading the novel. So here I have this idea of, as the camera pans out, there's an impression that empathy and humility have brought about a conclusive resolution. So description of a scene. Once again, pick something relevant. So you can see it's relevant because initially we had this idea of them as being, this image of Achilles brooding as Patroclus, which is a very distant image. You can feel the conflict. One guy's standing there, one guy's sitting here, and they're not, intimately close at all. Whereas with this last scene, I've picked it specifically because you have this image of Blair and Elizabeth, who initially were similar to Achilles and Patroclus in their conflict, but here we have them casually strolling through the royal gardens, which is a real sense of friendship and having overcome conflict. And then I also compare. So in Ransom, however, we're not offered such a cathartic ending. And once again, I talk about the ending. So things like Priam being killed, Achilles dying. Notice how I don't really summarize my points. I didn't do this in the end of your exam as well. I feel like you can if you want to with just 1 or 2 sentences. Don't make your entire conclusion a summary because that's pretty boring. More so you want to draw it out and what really the authors are trying to say and what you're trying to say throughout this entire essay. So here I'm more so focusing on what Maloof is trying to say, because for me, Frears in the film, it's pretty outright what he's trying to say about conflict. If you overcome it well, then you've done well. However, Maloof's Ransom is more complex because, and I mentioned it here, because the 2 people who do overcome it die. So I focus on the more complex. Text, and the more more subtle, or more thought-provoking, actually, more thought-provoking. Idea. So yeah, in Maloof's one, they achieve success, or not success, they overcome their conflict, but they both die. So what does that all mean for us as readers? What does that mean for humans? Right? And I expand upon a bit more. There's a sense of pity that despite their efforts, it's only a provisional triumph. It doesn't last, and they're dead. However, what I'm suggesting then is that Maloof is actually trying to inspire his readers, because even though they died, this significant change that both Priam and Achilles managed to bring about, like, remember they're very against each other enemies. They should hate each other and not relent and just be very violent towards one another. But what Maloof is suggesting that if they are even able to achieve this change during a Homeric myth, so in like a war situation, in a legendary story, then maybe we can also resolve our conflict when we don't have such, war on, well, at least in, well, we wouldn't have like a similar Trojan War in most of our situations. We don't have war and nemesis. And so he's seeking to inspire us to overcome conflict in our daily lives, not to hold up pent-up anger, because if these guys who are fighting a war and should hate each other can do it, so can we. So I'll focus on a few main takeaways for the entire essay as a whole. So we have the intro, so scene, and then your topic, signposting. Straightforward signposting. Body paragraphs, sort of a topic sentence, a text 1, and you can have an overview sentence here, and then lots of comparison in the second half. And then finally I finished off with a human comment, a philosophical comment. And with your conclusion, I like just thinking about the overall contention. So talking about overall contention. What are they trying to say? What are you trying to say as well? What are the authors trying to say? Trying to say, what are you trying to convey? Yeah, so comparative is difficult because you have these two texts that you have to compare, and in a way it's also good because you need less analysis and sort of evidence. It's more description and a comparison of ideas. So I hope you guys enjoyed this this breakdown of my comparative essay. Please let me know if you have any questions in the comments box below. So thank you guys for tuning in to today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Good luck for your comparative SACs. I'll be getting a lot into exam revision and how I took different exams, and a lot more of that coming up. Term 3 is also pretty hefty in terms of SACs, so good luck with all that, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.